Uh, I don't know. It's very tough to say all these things in words.
Ferrero finally admits what the Netflix documentary only hinted at, and he did it calmly, which made it worse. On El Cafelito in March 2026, he pointed directly at Ibiza. Pre-Wimbledon trips, the nights of disconnecting. He said, on record, those trips made him question whether Alcaraz could be the best in history. Not would, could. A coach who built a six-slam champion, publicly pulling the ceiling down on his own player. The fans heard it and they did not take it quietly. If that is what he says on camera, what was he saying without cameras? That line spread fast, because it was the right question. Here is the part most people are skipping. Ferrero was not wrong about the tension. He was just wrong about where it started. The Ibiza argument was the visible surface. And yes, he finally said those nights were not just fun. But the real beginning was 2023, a clay swing Ferrero skipped during Alcaraz's injury comeback. And the end was a contract delivered on a Saturday with a Monday deadline. Everything between them in those 2 years was just the same disagreement repeating. The split was not sudden, it was scheduled. Subscribe if you follow this rivalry closer than the rankings. Drop your take in the comments. Now let us go back to where this actually started. Go back far enough and this story does not start in a boardroom or on a tennis court. It starts in Villena, a small town in southeastern Spain, home to Juan Carlos Ferrero's academy. A teenage boy arrives. He is 16 years old, already hitting the ball with a weight that does not match his age. Ferrero watches him for a while and makes a decision that most coaches would have overthought. He commits. Fully, not as a technical trainer, not as a part-time consultant, as the person most responsible for turning this kid into a tennis player the world would eventually run out of adjectives to describe. That decision alone tells you everything about who Ferrero is. He is not a passive observer. He does not half commit to anything. When he took on Alcaraz, he took on the whole project. The schedule, the mentality, the sacrifice, the long-term vision. He had been world number one himself. He had won Roland Garros. He knew exactly what the top of this sport demanded, and he built his coaching philosophy around that knowledge. Structure, quality over volume, total professional focus. 2 hours of absolute intensity over 4 hours of going through the motions. That was his standard, and for years it worked. What followed between 2019 and 2025 was one of the most remarkable coaching partnerships modern tennis had seen. 6 Grand Slams, 24 tour-level titles, a world number one ranking at 19, the youngest in history at that point. Alcaraz won on clay, on grass, on hard courts. He beat Djokovic, he beat Sinner. He came back from 2 sets down in Grand Slam finals and made it look like he had planned the comeback from the warm-up. Ferrero was in that box for every single one of those moments, watching, adjusting, believing, at least publicly, that this was the player who could eventually surpass every record the sport had ever set. From the outside, it looked unbreakable. 2 Spanish champions, one who had already reached the summit, one who was still climbing, working toward the same destination. The tennis world looked at Ferrero and Alcaraz the way it once looked at Tony and Rafa Nadal, a bond that went beyond coaching. Alcaraz himself said it repeatedly. He called Ferrero a second parent, not a coach, a second parent. That is not the language of a professional arrangement. That is the language of someone who genuinely trusted another person with the most important years of their life. But here is what the trophies and the rankings and the post-match press conferences never showed you. Alcaraz is not built the same way Ferrero is. He never was. Ferrero is disciplined in human form, structured, meticulous, focused on the long game with the intensity of someone who spent his entire career obsessing over marginal gains. Alcaraz is something different. He plays tennis the way he lives, loose, expressive, electric. He does not grind through joy to find greatness. Joy is how he finds greatness. It is his engine, not his reward. The Ibiza trips were never a celebrity flex or a lack of professionalism. They were an extension of who he actually is. He goes, he disconnects, he comes back and wins Wimbledon. That was the pattern. That was always the pattern. Ferrero understood this about him. He said so publicly, more than once. After the 2025 French Open, When Alcaraz headed to Ibiza to celebrate defeating Sinner in one of the greatest finals Roland Garros had ever produced, Ferrero went on record and told the media to calm down. He said those days suited Alcaraz, that he would come back refreshed, motivated, ready. He defended the trips, he backed his player in front of the cameras. What the cameras did not show was the conversation happening behind them. The first sign that something was shifting inside this partnership did not come from Ibiza at all. It came from South America in 2023. Alcaraz had started that season injured and missed the Australian Open. When he returned to competition on the clay swing through South America, a part of the calendar Ferrero typically skipped, Ferrero was not there. For most coaches, that would be a scheduling note. For the Alcaraz family, it landed differently. His father, Carlos Alcaraz Sr., had always been present, always involved. And when his son was coming back from his first serious injury layoff, the absence of his head coach was noticed. Nothing was ever said publicly. No statement, no complaint, no quoted source with a name attached. But something shifted inside the camp during those weeks. A small seed of doubt about whether Ferrero's commitment matched the level the family expected, especially during the hard moments. That seed did not grow immediately. The 2023 season was still brilliant. Alcaraz won Wimbledon for the first time that summer, walking onto the grass courts like he had been playing there his whole life and defeating Djokovic in a final that had the entire sport standing up. Ferrero was there. The partnership delivered. Whatever the family had felt in South America, the results buried it temporarily, but it came back. The Netflix documentary Carlos Alcaraz My Way dropped in May 2025, and the tennis world got its first real look inside the room where the decisions were made. The documentary was honest in a way most sports productions avoid. It did not present a clean, inspirational narrative. It showed the friction. Ferrero and agent Albert Molina both appeared visibly uncomfortable when the conversation turned to Alcaraz's time away from tennis. The Ibiza trips came up directly. Molina pushed back on them. Ferrero questioned whether that lifestyle was compatible with becoming the best player in history. And then, most remarkably, the documentary showed Ferrero and Alcaraz having that conversation directly, on camera, the two of them sitting across from each other and navigating a disagreement that had clearly been running underneath the surface for a while. Alcaraz handled the public reaction to those scenes the way he handles a breakpoint. Calmly, he went to his first press conference after the documentary dropped and said it plainly. Every coach and player has those conversations about training, about schedules, about the things you want to do that you probably should not. He said whoever claims otherwise is lying. He was not defensive, he was not rattled. He was telling the truth and he knew it. Ferrero responded by defending Alcaraz publicly. He said the documentary was always going to attract criticism, especially if Alcaraz lost. He pointed out that their training philosophy was built on quality, not volume. He said whenever the team asked Carlos to work, Carlos worked. He stood behind his player in every interview. And yet the documentary had done something that could not be undone. It had made the private public. The tension that the team had been managing internally for 2 years was now something millions of people had watched. Every future loss would be filtered through it. Every future Ibiza trip would be a talking point. The team had lost control of the narrative, even if they had not yet lost each other. What broke the surface next was not a press conference. It was a Formula One race. After Alcaraz lost in the early rounds of the 2024 US Open, an early exit by his standards, the kind of result that a player of his ambition does not take lightly, he made a decision. He went to a Formula One event. Ferrero was against it. This was not a philosophical disagreement anymore. This was a direct conflict between what the coach wanted and what the player chose. Alcaraz went anyway, not out of disrespect, that is not who he is, but because he operates on the belief that disconnecting is not a distraction from his tennis. It is part of his preparation. Ferrero did not share that belief. He never had. And after the US Open, that difference was no longer something either side could pretend was a minor detail. The documentary had shown the world the tension. The F1 trip confirmed it inside the camp. By the end of 2024, Ferrero underwent knee surgery. It meant he could not travel to Australia for the start of the 2025 season. The family noted the absence. Again, nothing public. but the pattern was becoming harder to ignore. A coach who missed key moments, whose presence during the difficult windows was inconsistent, while also demanding a level of professional sacrifice from a player that left no room for anything else. The family had been building toward a conclusion for longer than anyone outside the camp realized. The 2025 season, in spite of all of this, was extraordinary. Monte Carlo, Rome. A second French Open title, won from 2 sets down against Sinner, saving championship points in one of the most dramatic finals the sport had ever produced. A run to the ATP finals in Turin that had Alcaraz playing some of the best tennis of his life. Ferrero and Samuel Lopez were jointly named ATP Coaches of the Year on December 11, 2025. 6 days later, the partnership was over. The contract arrived on a Saturday, December 13th. The deadline to respond was Monday. Ferrero had already planned the entire 2026 preseason. He had mapped out the Australian Open preparation. He believed, based on everything he had seen in Turin, that they were continuing. The document that arrived told a different story. It contained terms he did not recognize. Non-sporting clauses, conditions around the professional direction of Alcaraz's career that went beyond anything a standard renewal would include. Ferrero would later describe it as an invitation to leave dressed up as a contract offer. He had 48 hours to decide. He did not get a phone call from Alcaraz. He did not get a face-to-face conversation. The negotiation happened through representatives, through the circle, the agents, the family, the people whose job it was to protect Carlos Alcaraz's interests above everything else. Ferrero would later say in the Marca interview that perhaps if they had sat down together, they could have resolved it, but they did not sit down. And on December 17, 2025, Alcaraz posted on social media that the partnership had ended. That post was the moment the tennis world stopped. Within hours, Tony Nadal was on Spanish radio saying the reasons went beyond tennis. Former players were calling it one of the most shocking splits in recent memory. Analysts were going back through every interview, every documentary scene, every press conference, and rereading them through a new lens. The Ibiza conversations, the F1 trip, the absences. All of it looked different now. Then Alcaraz went to Melbourne and won the Australian Open. Without Ferrero, without the man who had been in his box for every major title he had ever won. He became the youngest player in history to complete the career Grand Slam, standing on the court in Melbourne with the trophy and a smile that looked entirely unbothered by the noise surrounding his name. He did not mention Ferrero in his post-match speech. Tony Nadal noticed. He said so publicly. The tennis world noticed too. And then on February 4th, 2026, someone noticed something else. Ferrero had unfollowed Alcaraz on Instagram. Not just Alcaraz, his physio and his fitness coach too. The post from tennis account Nishikora Pics went up and spread immediately. The caption read, "Is he upset that Alcaraz didn't mention him in his AO speech, or is it simply too painful to watch?" That question did not need an answer to do damage. It just needed to exist. Within a day, the tennis internet had split into 2 camps. The ones who felt Ferrero was a wounded man processing a painful loss, and the ones who felt the unfollow was a passive statement from someone who had not yet made peace with what happened. Ferrero eventually addressed it on El Cafelito. He said he did not do it out of spite. He said he needed to separate himself from Alcaraz for a while. He still followed Samuel Lopez, he still followed Agent Molina, just not the player, just not the person he had described as having the potential to be the best in history. And that is where the El Cafelito interview becomes the spine of this entire story. Because in that same interview, Ferrero finally said it. The thing the documentary had implied, the thing the contract dispute had masked, the thing the Instagram unfollow had gestured toward without naming directly. He said the Ibiza trips made him doubt. He pointed at those pre-Wimbledon nights, the disconnecting, the friends, the parties, and said they made him question whether Alcaraz could become the best in history. Not whether he was talented enough, not whether his technique was sound, whether his lifestyle was compatible with the kind of sacrifice that separates a great champion from the greatest of all time. A coach saying that about his own player, on camera, after 6 Grand Slams together, is not a minor comment, it is a confession. It tells you that somewhere inside that partnership, The doubt had been sitting for a long time. Ferrero had been defending Ibiza publicly while privately questioning it. He had been standing in that player's box, celebrating those titles, while carrying a concern he never fully resolved. The fans did not let it go quietly. One response that spread across tennis forums captured the mood. If that is what he says on camera, what was he saying without cameras? Another said that the more Ferrero talked, the less surprising the split became. A third told him directly to stop giving interviews and move on, because every time he spoke, he was making Alcaraz look more right and himself look more conflicted. Here is the truth underneath all of it. Ferrero was not wrong. The tension was real. The philosophical disagreement was genuine. A coach who won Roland Garros through total discipline, who built his career on sacrifice and structure, watching a player take pre-Wimbledon trips to a party island and come back and win Wimbledon anyway, that has to produce a complicated feeling. Ferrero could not fully believe in the method even when the method kept working. That is a human response, not a coaching failure. But Alcaraz was not wrong either. He has now won 7 Grand Slams. He completed the career slam at 22. He has done it with joy as his operating system, not in spite of it. Every time someone told him the Ibiza nights were a risk, he went, disconnected, came back, and won. The results were the answer. He gave it every time. What ended between them was not a coaching relationship that stopped working. It was a partnership where two people had fundamentally different answers to the same question: what does it actually take to be the best? Ferrero believed the answer was total sacrifice. Alcaraz believed the answer included living. Neither of them was going to change. So the circle made the decision the player himself might not have made alone, packaged it in a 48-hour contract offer, and ended it before another season could stretch the tension any further. Ferrero built the machine. Alcaraz refused to become one. And the most remarkable part of this story is that refusing to become the machine did not cost Alcaraz anything. He is world number 1. He has the career slam. He is 22 years old. The Ibiza nights were not just fun. Ferrero finally admitted that. But what he did not say, and what this story makes clear, is that those nights were also not the problem. They were just the place where two completely different ideas about greatness kept running into each other, year after year, until there was no room left for both of them. If this changed how you see this split, or if you think Ferrero had a point that Alcaraz and his circle never properly acknowledged, leave it in the comments. This is exactly the kind of conversation this channel is built for.